now the time for all ages, and invite any of our children or any of you feeling young at heart to come forward and join us, and so that I can see you on the screen. And this story comes from many traditions, but it's definitely a North American story. And no, I think it's probably got Jewish overtones to it, so it feels appropriate for today. And it's about this town, and it's called Regretville. And everyone is really not very happy. And this visitor comes to it one time, and he sees that everyone is walking around with this huge sack that's carrying, and they're walking around, and they're really weighed down by this huge sack. And he's wondering what's happening, and he talks to this young person. He's like, "You're young, but that looks really heavy. You look young and strong, and that looks really heavy. What are you carrying?" He goes, "Oh, these are the regrets that my family carry." And says, "These are all the things you regret?" And he goes, No, my family's passed them down. My great-grandfather, my great-grandmother passed them down. You're like, "See that family over there? We've been fighting with them for generations." And the person says, "And you're carrying all that about you? Does that not just thwart your joy in life, having this resentment towards another person?" And he goes, "It does, but there's nothing we can do about it." So the visitor says, "Well, I think there is." He said, "Why, can you call everyone in the town together? And I'd like to speak to them." And so he does. He contacts the mayor. The mayor calls everyone and says, "We think we've got someone who can help us get over all our regrets." And so they come in, and the visitor says, "I can help you get over your regrets with just 5 words. I am sorry, I forgive you. I'm sorry, I forgive you." And people go, "Is that it?" So they say that, and they leave. But they're still carrying a sack around with them. It's not as big as it was, but eventually it wears them down. It's maybe half as full as it was before. And the visitor's really kind of puzzled by this. He said, "Oh, I really thought that would work." So he goes back and thinks about it. He said, "Well, I guess I was wrong. I maybe just need to forgive myself." So he goes back. He said, "Can you call another meeting?" And the guy said, "Well, your idea, it worked a little. It didn't work completely. Please, I think I know what happened. What went wrong?" So the mayor calls everyone together again. He says, "I'm sorry, I was half right. But the other thing is, you need to say, 'I'm sorry, I forgive myself.' Because sometimes we don't forgive ourselves, and we carry around all this resentment and repair and pain and disappointment. And we need to forgive ourselves so that we can move on." So the people do this, say, "I'm sorry, I forgive myself." And they lightened their bag. And so that town then became this kinder, gentler, more caring place, because people were able to say, "I'm sorry, I forgive you. I'm sorry, I forgive myself." And people were able to move forward without grudges, without resentments, without fear, without disappointment. And they became Happyville.
Good morning from the UUFRC Sanctuary today. My name is Jeanne Gill, and I'm your UUFRC Connections Coordinator. We've had many meetings and emails about what we should all do logistically to make sure that our presence on site and in person at UUFRC will be what keeps us safe and healthy. I'd like to talk a little bit about what may be happening with us mentally. This pandemic has been upsetting and traumatic, to say the least. Our lives were turned upside down in the matter of a weekend in March 2020, and normal may never be a word we ever use again with respect to many aspects of our lives. As you return in person to the fellowship, I ask you that you be mindful of what we've all gone through. For some, touching may be out of the question. Please make it a habit to ask permission to shake hands or hug. If someone offers an elbow, perhaps that's what they can offer at this time. Be respectful of those choices, but always give people a choice. Always ask, be respectful. For some, Not attending church for a year and a half has been mentally taxing, as they've missed the very real importance and meaning of communication face to face. People have missed the social aspect of body language, nonverbal communication, and nuances that can only come with a person-to-person meeting. Approach each other with kindness. Be mindful of what you're going through and know that you're not alone because others are going through those same things. Be supportive. Err on the side of kindness. Understand that people may be grieving losses, working through having to give up a lifestyle they cherished, maybe a pet they cherished, or a person they cherished. This has been a time of extreme isolation for those who live alone. I know this because I live alone. Coming back in person makes me almost giddy, but I'm still filled with fear that we could close down at any time if the pandemic gets worse in our area. The disappointment this would feel at times insurmountable for me and others. Be compassionate. Don't leave the opportunity to reach out to your fellow churchgoers to a committee. While our Keep in Touch team has been amazing this past year and a half, we can all do our part. Pick a couple of people you've been close to in the past and call them or send them a note. People need a sense of friendship, connection, and most importantly, belonging. We can do that together as a body and as a community. Be a friend. The joy of belonging to this community for me is that I can reach out and be silly, sad, funny, weird, deep, or shallow with people I trust. I feel accepted. I don't feel judged. And I'm trying like crazy not to take things personally. Sometimes I'm too much for people because, frankly, my brand of enthusiasm is not for everyone, and I've dealt with that my whole life. But here at UUFRC, I've found a tribe of practical, warm, caring, intelligent, sensitive people who display many of the same quirks I feel I possess. That is my sense of belonging. Long live vulnerability and imperfection. Lead with love.
Today, I have the privilege of offering a reflection. It is based on my sense of what gets me through the night sometimes when I feel those burdens. Age has some privileges, and one of them is learning to lean into my limitations or my inability to see. And now I'm collecting some vignettes that I can bring to mind when those burdens seem great. Those vignettes are a couple of I'm going to offer two today, and they are a couple of the times that I have been aware of being touched by the holy. One of them is a very unlikely situation. It's year 2000, and my husband and I, and my brother and his wife, with their newborn, about 6-7-week-old baby, went to the Arlington National Cemetery on Memorial Day. My brother and I grew up as service kids, so that meant a lot to us. And it was also the time when hundreds upon hundreds of the Rolling Thunder motorcyclists had arrived in Washington and were all over Arlington National Cemetery. It was a momentously loud experience having them come into Washington, D.C. And and Memorial Day was the day we wanted to be there. We went and we were talking with some of the veterans that were there. One was a truly grizzled, hard-living looking man. And he came from the Vietnam time. I don't remember what he had done then, but he wore the motorcycle leathers, looked pretty, truly rough. And I looked at my brother, and he looked at his wife, And the two together kind of gave me a nod. And I said, would you like to see the baby? Would you like to hold this baby boy? And his eyes got wide. This hard man, his eyes got wide, and he said, yes. So Anita handed the baby to this man, and I've never seen hands that looked harder used. His nails could have been on both sides. It was just, they were hard hands. And he held this baby so carefully, and he got tears in his eyes. And he was touched by the Holy himself right there, right then. And then he handed little Robert back. It was a sublime moment for all of us. I have another one that comes to mind that is when we first moved here, and we lived in an apartment near the Redwood City Railroad tracks. And to get to the library, all we had to do was cross the tracks and go to the side and back of the library. So I had my two granddaughters over. One of them, the youngest, who should remain nameless, but I might forget and name her, had been a real pill much of the afternoon. She was out of sorts, and she was making me out of sorts. She is very bright and knew exactly how to push all of my buttons. By the time we left for the promised library, I was not a truly nice grandmother at the time. I just was stuck. And we got to the tracks, and she reached her hand for me, I think, first, before we started to cross the tracks. And as I held her hand, she looked up to me, and I said, I know, I'm just annoyed, Whitney. She said, I know you're mad at me, but you will always take good care of me and keep me safe, right? And I said, yes, I will. And it's these things that are the holy and give me a chance to lighten some of my burdens.
Thank you, Don. Tomorrow evening at sunset is the beginning of the Jewish high holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year, and we're encouraged to reflect back on the past year and our misdeeds. And it begins a 10-day period of atonement. And we search our souls for our wrongdoing, and we make amends for those things that we did wrong, that harmed others, that harmed ourselves, that did not take care of the planet. And then on Yom Kippur, 10 days later, which is a week on Wednesday at sunset, it's a day of atonement, and it's the holiest day of the year for the Jewish people, where the Jewish people ask God for forgiveness. So in the theme of forgiveness, I really wanted to explore what would forgiveness mean at this time of the pandemic, where we've been struggling for 18 months, and we seem to be suffering from compassion fatigue, pandemic fatigue, and it's just exhausting. So what would forgiveness look like? And I really think at this time, we really need to look at self-forgiveness, because we are suffering trauma fatigue. We've been living in these 18 months of trauma, and you look at the events of even just in the last couple of weeks, the tragedy in Afghanistan, the political divisiveness, the floods in the East Coast, the floods in Louisiana, and these are very close to home. And then we've got fires in Lake Tahoe, where many of us have home. There's just so much, and we're all kind of stretched to breaking point. And I think we really need to be gentle with ourselves and gentle with each other, because it's hard. We're exhausted. And I think we need to forgive ourselves that maybe we can't be quite as compassionate as we want. We can't be quite as gentle and kind and caring as we want. And that's okay. Let's forgive ourselves. Because I think that might be the most important lesson we can learn during this time of Jewish high holidays. It's not about forgiving others. Can we forgive ourselves? As I said in the Time for All Ages, that idea of regrets and those, acknowledging wrongdoings that we have done in the past can really be a burden that we carry. And that burden can actually stop us. It can actually stop us from really engaging as well as we'd like in the here and now and plan for the future. We're so dwelling in the past, we can't move forward into being the people we desire to be now and in the days ahead because we're so focused in the past. And I know I would have huge respect for the Jewish tradition, and I can see in regular years how it could be good to identify those failings where we've hurt other peoples. Yet, I think if we do that, we just end up burdening ourselves and beating ourselves up. Yes, we need to be kinder to other people, but we really need to be first and foremost at this time gentle and kind to ourselves. And I want to touch on something else from the Jewish tradition that I think that can be very valuable at this time, and that's the idea of lament. Any of you who've read the Hebrew Scriptures, there's whole books and books of all these lamentations, and for the Jews it was about 2,500 years ago when Jerusalem had been destroyed, and the lamentations were about that. But they took that to a fine art form. It's beautiful literature, these lamentations, and the lamentations have three levels. They have, you lament what you've lost, and I think we need to do that. We need to acknowledge the connections we have lost, the gatherings in person, the going out, the going to concerts, the going and traveling that we cannot do. We need to lament that night now and acknowledge it, that we're angry, we're disappointed, we're heartbroken at these broken connections. And then we need to confess as the next stage of lament. Confess our hopes and fears and disappointment. It can be disappointment with ourselves, disappointment with others. We need to confess that. And confession can be a hard thing for Unitarian Universalists to do. But at its heart, confession is naming those truths deep inside of us that we're scared of. And it's an act of vulnerability to confess that pain, that needs, those desires we have. And then the final thing with lamentations and lament is petition. We petition for a way forward. We petition to have strength, from outside, from within, from those around us. We petition to give us the strength so we can move forward, so we can move into a world that's better today than it was yesterday, and better tomorrow than it is today. There's a petition. So that idea of lament, of lamenting, confessing, and petitioning from the Jewish tradition, I think could be really powerful for us right now, because we have a world that's challenging us. And what does that lamentation mean? That idea of lamentation and confession and petition, what does that mean for self-forgiveness? The Council of Keir Brady says, self-forgiveness enables you to separate who you are from the mistakes you've made. This way you can begin to learn from your choices and find ways to make amends when possible. It will be easier for you truly to forgive others when you start forgiving yourself. Forgiveness is a process that takes time. I think that's really important to recognize that forgiveness is a process. It's not an event. And forgiving ourselves is a continual process that we need to engage in. We need to engage in so that we can be available for others emotionally, socially, and spiritually. So we can be there to forgive others when we are wronged. And there's an element of self-forgiveness that's letting go of the expectations of ourselves, those perfectionisms in our jobs, in our relationship. Sorry to disappoint you, but I'm not perfect, and I suspect none of you are. And that is okay. That is life. That is being human. And what self-forgiveness can allow us, it can allow us to transform our fears, our angers, our disappointments, our heartbreak into a healthy and healing path forward. That petition that we desire when we lament. And Lucille Zimmerman says, emotional disclosure is a path to self-forgiveness. We dwell on things that are unresolved and burden us. Once understanding and resolution happens, it literally frees up space in our minds that we've been renting to rumination or fear. I think it frees up space in our mind. I think it frees up space in our heart. It frees up space in our soul so that we can move forward. I think what we need to free up with self-forgiveness is we need to prioritize care, kindness, and patience for ourselves, and hence we'll be able to free up that for others. And I know many of us, we read these things on social media and Facebook about these people during the pandemic who, they learned a foreign language, they played a learned a new musical instrument, they took up a new hobby. Really? I was just trying to survive. I mean, good on you if you were able to do that, but most of us were just trying to make it through from one day to the next. The parents with young children who were not only working but were having to school the children at home, they were just trying to get a meal on the table and maybe only wear 3 days old clothes and not 4-day-old clothes. I mean, it was really hard. And we cannot set expectations that are unrealistic. We have to recognize that this is really hard. We are in a global pandemic that most of us have never experienced, and we do not need to set expectations that are unrealistic and forgive ourselves for even failing to meet the low expectations. The piles of laundry, the dirty table, the no clean dishes. I mean, that's just the reality of what we've been through. We need to prioritize our care, our kindness, and our patience. The great South African justice leader and religious leader, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, tells the story of he was traveling with his family, with his father, and they did this 15-hour drive, and they had a few hours sleep, and they had to do this 15-hour drive back. And he was exhausted when they got to their first destination, and his father said, I really have something I'd like to talk to you about. And Desmond Tutu's father, he was a loving person, but they had a difficult relationship with his whole family. And Desmond Tutu said, look, I'm exhausted. Can we talk about it tomorrow? And his father kind of reluctantly agreed. And Desmond Tutu woke up the next day, and his cousin came to tell him that his father had died that evening. And Desmond Tutu was devastated. It was a surprise his father had not been ill. And he got into all this recrimination, like, what did my dad say? If I couldn't have just said, yes, I can speak to you. I was tired, but now I'll never have the opportunity to hear what he was going to share with me. And then over time, Desmond Tutu recognized that he had to forgive himself. He wasn't to know that his dad was going to die, but that feeling of recrimination that he felt for himself and not giving in to his father, not saying, yes, I've time now to hear, burdened him almost more than the death of his father did. And then he recognized, Desmond Tutu, that he needed to forgive himself so he could fully grieve his father, so he could fully move into the mourning that he needed and not get burdened by this one incident that was coloring his whole relationship with his father. And Desmond Tutu said this, he said, the reason to forgive ourselves are the same as forgiving others, is how we become free of the past, is how we move on, heal, and grow, is how we make meaning of our suffering. Forgiving ourselves frees our energies to tell a new story of who we are. And Desmond Tutu teaches that we can learn from the past without holding ourselves hostage by what we've done in the past. And as I mentioned earlier, forgiveness is a journey, it's not an event. And it's something we maybe need to work on again and again, to forgive ourselves again and again, daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, for the same event. Because we've all made mistakes, we all have regrets. But we cannot be defined by regrets. We cannot be defined by our worst acts. We cannot be defined by our bad behavior. We are fully human. We are the spectrum of humanity where we do great good and we can do some bad things. Sometimes consciously, deliberately, sometimes just thoughtlessness. I learned a lot about self-forgiveness in my own life. As some of you may know, my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2011. And for any of us who have dealt with family members, loved ones with Alzheimer's or dementia, or really anyone who's struggled with family members or their own mental health or addiction concerns, it's really tough. And of course, I was living in the States and my mother was back in Scotland, so there was a distance that definitely made it hard. But you know, when I was back in the rare visits back, I'd find I'd be getting really frustrated with my mum, and I wasn't being, and Alzheimer's is a horribly cruel disease. It's horrible for the person experiencing it and horrible for the family around. But I became really disappointed and angry with myself that I couldn't be as caring or as loving or as kind to my mother. And in some ways I'd even realized that this is not really my mother. I was in visiting her and she was in a wonderful home. She lived at a house for 3 years and then she was in a home for the last 4 years of her life. She died in February 2018. And I was visiting her in the home. I was getting so angry and frustrated at her, but I really get angry and frustrated myself. I couldn't be as patient and kind as caring as I want. So I ended up leaving, not storming out, but kind of angry and leaving. And drove down to the coast, which was only about 4 miles where the home my mum was staying in was, and I was on the beach, and this was like a February, March in Scotland, so it was grey, it was windy, it was raining, the huge waves coming in, and the sea kind of modelled the anger I was experiencing in myself, and it was anger, not really when I thought about it, my mum, it was anger at me for not being able to deal with this circumstance. And I lamented. I screamed at the sea, at my anger, at my disappointment myself. I said it loudly. And I confessed that pain, the pain I was having at seeing my mum there in that state. And it was unfair. She had Alzheimer's 2 years after my father died, so she went straight from caring for my dad to grief to dying, and life felt very unfair in her. But my anger was at myself and not being more compassionate for her. Then I petitioned for help beyond myself. I could not handle what we were doing. I needed help. And it was that act of asking for help beyond myself. And I had conversations with Natalie, my partner, about this. I had a conversation with a close friend who lived in Scotland, Jim, about this. I said, I need help beyond this. I can't handle this. And it was that asking for help beyond myself that allowed me to forgive myself around this. And I think that's one of the acts of self-forgiveness that we don't often recognize. Self-forgiveness is you allow yourself, you get vulnerable yourself, you allow yourself to ask for help beyond yourself because you know this may be beyond me. But we can't go there until we forgive ourselves and acknowledge our limitations, acknowledge our vulnerabilities, and acknowledge the very real pain that we're in. And so for any of you out there who are dealing with family members or your own mental health struggles or addiction struggles or Alzheimer's, know that it's incredibly hard on you. You do need to ask for help, and first step in maybe doing that is forgiving yourself. Forgiving yourself, because I think it's beyond any of us to deal with those situations on our own. And it's a trial. And to be honest, I'm still in that process of forgiving myself for that. I wish I could have been more loving. I wish I could be more kind. I wish I could be more caring. I wish I could be more compassionate. and I can only try and do better now. But self-forgiveness can allow us to open our hearts and discover the real pain and grieve it, and then release it so that it no longer influences our behavior and choices. And I do feel I was, after that day, gradually, day by day, I was able to be kinder, I was able to be more caring, more generous with myself, and that allowed me to be more kind and caring and generous to my mother and those around us. Because by not forgetting moments like that, for not forgetting those times where we have to forgive ourselves, allow us to learn from it. Otherwise, we just dwell in the past of continually finding recriminations for how we didn't do well enough. By remembering it, not forgetting it, even if we forgive ourselves, allow us to learn from it. I want to finish now by sharing a poem by Rabbi Naomi Levy. I've been blaming myself, God, for the tragedy that has been following me. The thoughts keep running through my mind. I could have done more, I should have done more, but none of this self-doubt can erase the past. Teach me, God, to believe that I don't deserve to be punished forever. Help me to forgive and to love myself despite my weakness. Show me your love this day and always. Those are the words of Rabbi Naomi Levy. So what if each of us here today could show a love for ourselves this day and always? Self-compassion and self-forgiveness are the ultimate act of self-love. This could be how we can transform our pain from the past, our disappointments from the past, our fears from the past, and turn it into a more hopeful, loving, compassionate future. This is a lesson I take from Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in the year 2021.